Mr. Lontan met her at an evening gathering hosted by the assistant head of his department, and love enveloped him like a net. Her father, a provincial tax collector, had died several years earlier. After his death, she moved to Paris with her mother, who soon established connections with the bourgeois families in their neighborhood, hoping to find a suitable match for her daughter. Though modest in means, they were respectable, discreet, and charming. The young woman embodied the ideal of a virtuous bride, one every sensible young man dreams of entrusting his future to. Her quiet beauty radiated angelic purity, and the faint, almost imperceptible smile that never left her lips seemed to reflect the light of her soul. Everyone admired her, and acquaintances repeated endlessly, "Fortunate is the man who marries her. A better wife cannot be found." Mr. Lontan, then a clerk at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with an annual salary of 3,500 francs, proposed to her and soon married. He was indescribably happy. She managed the household with such thoughtful frugality that their life felt almost luxurious. She showered her husband with care, tenderness, and affection. Her charm was so profound that, 6 years into their marriage, he loved her even more than in the early days. There was only one thing he could not accept: her passion for the theater and her fondness for imitation jewelry. Her friends, wives of modest civil servants, often secured theater boxes for fashionable performances, even premieres. Her husband, weary after a long day's work, was obliged to accompany her, though such outings exhausted him. He begged her to go with a lady acquaintance who could escort her home afterward. At first, she refused, deeming it improper, but eventually relented, and he was deeply grateful. Yet her love of the theater soon awakened a desire to dress up. She always dressed tastefully, though simply and modestly, and it was in this understated attire that her gentle, sincere charm became most striking. She had grown accustomed to wearing large earrings with imitation diamonds, fake pearls, bracelets of cheap gold, and combs adorned with colored glass meant to resemble precious stones. Her husband disliked this fascination with trinkets and often said, "My dear, when one cannot afford real jewels, beauty and grace must serve as the only adornments. These are the rarest treasures of all." But she would smile softly and reply, "What can I do? I'm fond of them. It's my weakness. I know you're right, but I can't help myself. I adore jewelry." As she fingered the pearls of a necklace, admiring the sparkle and play of the faceted stones, she would say, "Just look how beautifully it's made. It's almost real." He would chuckle, "You have the taste of a gypsy." Sometimes, as they spent quiet evenings together, she would place her Morocco jewelry box on the tea table and examine her trinkets with such passionate attention, as if they brought her secret delight. Often, she would drape a necklace around her husband's neck, laugh heartily, and exclaim, "You look so silly," then throw her arms around him and kiss him fervently. One winter night, returning from the opera, she caught a severe chill. The next day, she began to cough. A week later, she died of pneumonia. Lontan nearly followed her to the grave. His grief was so overwhelming that his hair turned white within a month. He wept from morning till night, his heart torn by unbearable sorrow. Her voice, her smile, her entire charm haunted him relentlessly. Even time failed to dull his pain. At work, when colleagues gathered to chat, his face would suddenly contort, his eyes fill with tears, and he would burst into sobs. He preserved her bedroom untouched and locked himself in there daily to dwell in memory. Everything, the furniture, her dresses, remained exactly as it had been on the last day of her life. But life grew difficult. While she was alive, his salary had sufficed for all their needs. Now, it was barely enough for him alone. He could not fathom how she had managed to serve fine wines and delicate dishes that he could no longer afford. He began falling into debt and ran about in search of money like a man driven to desperation. One day, finding himself without a single sou in his pocket, and with a full week remaining until his salary was due, he resolved to sell something. At once, the idea struck him to part with his late wife's trinkets, toward which he had always harbored a quiet aversion. That gaudy imitation jewelry, which had once irritated him, now, appearing before his eyes day after day, slightly tarnished even the memory of the woman he had loved. He spent a long time sifting through the pile of ornaments she had left behind, for up until her final days, she had continued bringing home new glittering baubles. At last, he selected a long necklace that, judging by how often she wore it, had likely been her favorite. He hoped to get 6 or 8 francs for it. For a fake, it was crafted with remarkable finesse. Slipping the necklace into his pocket, he walked along the boulevards toward the ministry, keeping an eye out for a reputable jeweler. Eventually, he spotted a suitable shop and entered, slightly embarrassed to reveal his need by offering such a questionable item for sale. "Sir," he said to the jeweler, "I'd like to know how much you would value this." The jeweler took the necklace, examined it from every angle, tried it on his wrist, then peered at it through a magnifying glass. He called over a clerk, whispered something to him, placed the necklace back on the counter, and stepped back to judge its effect from a distance. Mr. Launton, uneasy with the thoroughness of the inspection, was about to say, Yes, I know. It's worth nothing at all," when the jeweler suddenly declared, "This necklace, sir, is worth between 12 and 15,000 francs. But I will only purchase it if you can clearly explain how it came into your possession." The widower's eyes widened, and he stood frozen, mouth agape, unable to grasp what he had just heard. At last he stammered, "Excuse me, are you certain?" The jeweler, misinterpreting his astonishment, replied curtly, "You're welcome to try elsewhere. Perhaps someone will offer more. In my opinion, it's worth no more than 15,000. If you don't find a better offer, come back to me." Stunned, Mr. Launton retrieved the necklace and hurried out, seized by a vague urge to think things through alone. But once on the street, he couldn't help but laugh aloud. What a fool! Can't even tell a fake from the real thing. I should have held him to his word. What a simpleton! He headed to another shop, located at the corner of Rue de la Paix. As soon as the jeweler laid eyes on the necklace, he exclaimed, "Ah, yes, I know this piece well. It was purchased here." Overcome with emotion, Mr. Launton asked, "And what is its value?" "I sold it for 25,000 francs. I can offer you 18, but by law, you must first explain how it came into your possession." Mr. Launton sank into a chair. His legs had given way beneath him. "Yes, but please look again, sir. I was always certain it was a fake." "Would you kindly give me your name?" the jeweler asked. "Certainly, Launton. I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and live at 16 Rue de Martyrs." The jeweler opened his ledger, searched through the pages, and announced, "This necklace was indeed delivered to Madame Launton at 16 Rue de Martyrs on the 20th of July, 1876. They stared at each other intently. Launton, bewildered and shaken, the jeweler, eyeing him with suspicion, as if confronting a thief. The jeweler continued, "May I keep the necklace for one day? I'll give you a receipt in exchange." "Yes, of course," Mr. Launton murmured, taking the folded slip and slipping it into his pocket. He crossed the street, walked aimlessly in one direction, realized he'd lost his way, turned toward the Tuileries, crossed the Seine, understood he was off course again, and wandered back to the Champs-Élysées, his steps devoid of purpose. His thoughts were tangled. He tried to reason, to understand how such a thing could be. His wife could never have afforded such an expensive item. Certainly not. Then it must have been a gift. A gift. But from whom? And why? He stopped in the middle of the street, rooted to the spot. A dreadful suspicion stirred within him. Could it be that she, Then all the other jewels, were they gifts too? The ground seemed to shift beneath him. The tree before him swayed. He reached out and collapsed. He regained consciousness in a pharmacy, where passers-by had carried him. They escorted him home, and he locked himself in his room. Until nightfall, he wept uncontrollably, pressing a handkerchief to his mouth to stifle his cries. Then, exhausted by grief, he lay down and sank into a heavy sleep. With the first light of dawn, he rose slowly. He was supposed to go to the ministry, but after such a shock, work was impossible. He decided to stay home and sent a note to his superior. Soon he remembered he had to return to the jeweler, and blushed with shame. He hesitated for a long time, but he couldn't leave the necklace at the shop. He dressed and went out. The weather was glorious. A blue sky stretched over the smiling city. People strolled leisurely, hands in their pockets. Watching them, Lantin thought, so this is wealth. For the rich, even misfortune rolls off like water from a duck's back. They live as they please, travel, amuse themselves. Ah, if only I were rich. Suddenly, he felt a pang of hunger. He hadn't eaten a crumb since the day before. His pockets were empty, and the thought of the necklace returned. 18,000. 18,000 francs. A fortune. He made his way to Rue de la Paix and began pacing up and down the sidewalk opposite the shop. 18,000 francs. 20 times he was about to enter, and each time shame held him back. But hunger became unbearable, and he had not a single sou. Suddenly, he made up his mind. Quickly, before he could reconsider, he dashed across the street and entered the shop. Seeing him, the owner brightened, smiled warmly, and offered him a chair. The clerks approached, casting cheerful glances at Lantin, trying to hide their amusement. "I've made inquiries, sir," said the jeweler, "and if you haven't changed your mind, I'm ready to pay the amount I offered." "Yes, please," the clerk murmured. The jeweler opened a drawer, counted out 18 large banknotes, and handed them to Lantin. He signed a receipt and, with a trembling hand, tucked the money into his pocket. At the door, he turned to the jeweler, who was still smiling, and said quietly, eyes lowered, "I still have some jewelry left, also inherited. Perhaps you'd be interested in purchasing those as well," said Lantin, doing his best to sound casual. "With pleasure," replied the jeweler with a courteous bow. One of the clerks hurried out of the room to avoid bursting into laughter. Another blew his nose loudly, trying to hide a grin. Flushed to the roots of his hair, but maintaining composure, Lantin declared with dignity, "I'll bring them over right away." He hired a cab and went home to collect the jewels. An hour later, he returned, still without having eaten breakfast. The jeweler and his assistants began examining each item carefully, appraising them one by one. Nearly all had been purchased from that very shop. Now Lantin began to argue over prices, grew indignant, demanded to see the sales records, and as the total climbed higher, his voice grew louder. The earrings with large diamonds were valued at 20,000 francs, the bracelets at 35, the brooches, rings, and lockets at 16,000, the sapphire and emerald set at 14,000, and the solitaire on a gold chain at 40,000. Altogether, the collection was worth 196,000 francs. It seems the lady who owned these preferred to invest her savings in jewelry, the jeweler remarked with a good-natured smile. That method of investing capital is no worse than any other, Lantin replied with solemn conviction. They agreed that the final appraisal would be completed the following day, and Lantin left the shop. Out on the street, he caught sight of the Vendôme column and was suddenly seized by an irresistible urge to climb it like a prize mast. He felt so light. He imagined he could leapfrog over the statue of the emperor perched high in the sky. He went to Voisin for breakfast and ordered wine at 20 francs a bottle. Then he hired a cab and took a ride through the Bois de Boulogne. As carriages passed by, he looked at them with mild disdain, barely restraining himself from shouting, "I'm rich too. I have 200,000 francs." Remembering the ministry, he headed there, walked into his superior's office with breezy confidence, and announced, "My dear sir, I'm submitting my resignation. I've come into an inheritance of 300,000 francs." He bid a warm farewell to his former colleagues, shared his plans for a new life, and then dined at the English cafe. Seated beside a gentleman who seemed respectable enough, he couldn't resist the temptation and, with a playful smile, confided that he had inherited 400,000 francs. For the first time in his life, he wasn't bored at the theater, and he spent the night in the company of prostitutes. 6 months later, he remarried. His second wife was a respectable woman, but her temperament was difficult. She wore him out thoroughly. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share your thoughts and impressions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.